Hello and welcome to another episode of It Came from the Page. Apologies, this is yet again a late video. I had the appointment I was only supposed to have on Tuesday, got split in two between Tuesday and Friday because I was doing so bad on them. And they're basically just tests and evaluations. Anyways, those did not go well. And it's pretty much confirmed now that I will not be returning to work anytime soon because my body is still trash. And so is my brain. But oh well. I have been filling my trash brain with plenty of movies because it's the Halloween season. October is probably going to be the least amount of books I read in a month because I do kind of just split all of Halloween into like chunks where I'm like, well, okay, I'll read, but I also watch a lot of movies. I like to watch some TV shows. I like to go for a lot of walks. I like to actually go to haunted houses occasionally and all of this stuff that kind of makes it so I'm not just reading like I am most months. So instead of going over what I've read so far this month, which is a few, I think I'm on my third book right now, but I thought it would be more interesting to talk about the movies I've been watching because I have been watching a lot. As I record this, it's only the 8th of October, and I have already watched about 12 movies. So let's just get into it and chat about these. So I started off by watching Fright Night, the 1985 version, not that remake, which is... I thought I liked it, and then I watched it a few years ago, and that movie is god-awful. But the original is one of my absolute favorite movies of all time. My favorite vampire film from the 80s, which is saying a lot because there are some damn good vampire films in the 1980s. Basically, I read this because I'm also reading the new Fright Night book, Fright Night Origins, which just came out. And that was a great book, and I wanted to kind of compare it to the original film, just so I could kind of get an idea of what's new, what's old. And also, I don't really need that much of an excuse to watch that movie, because I love it. Next up, Tales from the Dark Side of the movie. I had seen this before, like Fright Night. It had been a few years, and I remembered enjoying it, but I didn't remember a lot of the other segments, other than the cat from hell and the gargoyle scene. So I rewatched it, and I had a really fun time. Not all of them work, and some of them are better than others. I think the only perfect segment of the trio is the Cat from Hell. That is a fantastic story and a fantastic segment that I think works all the way through. Everything else is a little bit not as good, but it is still fun. Then, I also, the same day, I watched the new Black Phone. And I do not like Scott Derrickson, the director. I don't really like many, if any, of his prior films. But I do like Joe Hill, as I've discovered from last month. And I thought, well, I've heard some good things about it. It does look interesting. I'll give it a chance. Boy, am I glad I did. This was one of the best movies of the year. I absolutely loved it. The Black Phone, the plot of it is essentially, boys are being kidnapped and put into the basement, and we follow a boy who gets trapped in the basement, and he has some form of, psychic abilities, and he's able to communicate with the ghosts of the other boys who were trapped before him. This is a period piece set in the 70s. Absolutely amazing. Some really good performances. Incredibly creepy. And I was just really happy with how this entire story played out. And the kid performances in this were absolutely amazing. I don't like children most of the time, especially in movies. But this one I 100% adored. Then I watched something I did not enjoy very much at all. Which was the new movie that just came out, My Best Friend's Exorcism. Whew. Anyways, let's go on to the next one. I also watched... My Best Friend's Exorcism was quite bad. Just read the book. I think some of the performances in that movie were not terrible, but I don't think the script did anyone any favors because it did not manage to transform it into a movie. It really felt like a book that was poorly adapted, essentially. And you didn't... even this... It replicates some of the scares from My Best Friend's Exorcism, but it is nowhere near as creepy as it is in the book. And also, it's missing some very, very pivotal emotional moments that are extremely important. I mean, for example, no one wants to watch a dog die in a movie. It's sad. It's terrible. But in the book, My Best Friend's Exorcism, yes, a dog dies. Here you go. You know now. It's very important to the overall plot. And I think just removing that really kind of messes with everything that goes forward through the movie. And they cut out the coda at the very end of the book, which is that last chapter that takes place after the events of the main story, and that is an amazing chapter and made me cry. And it being cut out, anyways, I don't want to get too far like hating on this movie. I do think the acting is good. The acting is solid. I just don't think it's a very good movie personally. Next up, I watched Kaidan, Piece of Darkness, which was a J-horror film featuring a whole swath of short stories put into a very creepy package. I had never heard of this movie before, and I was super scared. It was a very, very scary movie and extremely effective. So if you have not seen Kaidan, Piece of Darkness, I would 100% recommend it. I found it on Midnight Pulp, which is a streaming service I have. I'm not sure if it's anywhere else. Maybe it's on Tubi. I don't know. The next up, Theater of Blood, which is a old school Vincent Price movie that I had a great time with. I think the middle of the film has some pacing issues, but overall it is a very fun film. And the plot of this one is essentially Vincent Price plays this actor who was spurned from winning a prestigious award. So he fakes his death and then comes back to murder all of his critics who didn't give him the award. And it was very fun. Vincent Price is hamming it up to the nth degree. He has all these amazing different costumes before he does his, like, revenge on all these critics. And it was equal parts dark and hilarious. Again, I think the middle part doesn't have perfect pacing, but I do think overall it's a very fun movie. It's really interesting because it's a 70s movie, so it is right on the cusp of a slasher film because there are a lot of slasher elements to this, but the villain is Vincent Price. So, I mean, who does not want to watch that? Next up, a movie I'm pretty sure I seem to be the only person who enjoyed, and that is the new Netflix film, Mr. Harrigan's Phone, which, of course, is a Stephen King adaptation. I love If It Bleeds, the Stephen King book that this comes from, and I actually really enjoyed the short story, Mr. Harrigan's Phone. This is not really a horror film. I think it's been kind of sold as a horror film, and it's more of a supernatural drama. Essentially, a boy befriends an older man, and the older man passes away, but he takes his new phone into the grave. And I think people have really kind of been disingenuous when they're talking about this, especially online. I saw a whole bunch of reviews on Letterboxd that were just like, oh, evil phone, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, that's like, no, it's not, that's not what it's talking. King in that short story, and this is a very faithful adaptation to that short story, is really kind of trying to explore our relationships with our phone, and it's obviously someone coming at that as somebody who did not grow up always using their phones. I think there's a lot of nuance in here. I think some of the performances are great. I really did enjoy this film. It's very slow. It is not a very exciting film. So if you're into something slow and contemplative, it is definitely a coming-of-age film with very, very light horror elements. I think it's really fun, and I think it works pretty well. Pretty much everyone else seems to absolutely hate this movie. I see a whole bunch of 1-star reviews on Letterboxd. I don't think most people enjoy this movie. It really does bring the question, should I even be talking about movies if my opinions are so far away from how everyone else feels? I like Mr. Harrigan's Phone, Kachanga. One that is not very controversial, but is extremely amazing, is the Netflix film His House. This actually came out in 2020, and is basically the story of immigrants coming to Britain, and when they are like getting processed through immigration, they pretty much get locked into having to stay at this haunted domicile. And it's a lot more, there's a lot more to it than that. It's very, very interesting and it is very complex. Like, it's dealing with a lot of very big issues and having a really interesting conversation about them. And it's also extremely scary. So it has some social importance, but it also has quite a bit of genuine scares. So I love that. Next up, I rewatched, this is one I'd seen before, I rewatched Scream, the 2022 version of Scream. I know it's the same name as the 1996 version, but really people complain about that a little bit too much, because if you're a Dracula fan, there are like 20,000 films just named Dracula. Get over it, horror fans. You just gotta say the year afterwards. So calm down. Overall, not a fan of this movie as much as I am the other Scream movies. I do think that it's good still. I did enjoy it. This is technically Scream 5. If you don't know anything about the Scream movies, they're really hard to say. They're basically kind of like serial killer slasher movies that almost always have to do with a phone of some kind. And they have a big opening scene and then the slasher elements start. And it's always a whodunit because they never reveal who it is. So each Scream movie has a different set of killers. So you're kind of trying to figure out who are the killers in this particular version. I don't think this is a bad movie by any means. I don't like some of the choices it makes. I do feel like it's not talking about horror movie fandoms. It seems to be talking more about like Marvel and like Star Wars level fandoms. And I think that while a lot of the issues they're talking about are still very, very, very present in horror movie fandoms, I think this discussion is a tad bit different. Because, you know, we have had things like Halloween 3 that have been controversial when they first came out because they didn't feature Michael Myers, and then gradually through time they accepted it, whereas it's really seemed to be kind of talking about reboots and all this stuff, and I just think I just don't think it's as focused on the horror genre as I would have liked it to be. And also I think it has some troubling things to say about people who are like the children of serial killers. And that is like, in the real world, there are some very big issues with just having a character who is, who's the daughter of a serial killer, and having any elements of them being quote unquote bad by birth is very, very bad. Because a lot of times they're just people who had no idea and they have very sad lives. So it's like this level of reality they try to bring in there that I think is very bad and has some problematic elements. Other than that, though, the cast is really good in this one, and it does still provide some entertaining Scream-level kills. Something that doesn't provide anything even remotely good is The Last Night in Soho, which came out last year. I love Edgar Wright. I have actually loved every other Edgar Wright film I've seen. I don't think Last Night in Soho is very good. First off, I think the first 20 minutes are very bad. They're poor pacing. Like, it's bad. I feel like they were trying to film it and edit it in such a way that once the horror starts, they change editing styles, because once it hits that moment of like the actual horror thing starting, then it gets interesting. The basic plot of this one is it is a fashion student going off to live in London, and when she kind of goes to stay in this boarding house, she starts to flash back in her dreams to something that happened in the 1960s. The period piece elements were kind of interesting. I think the middle portion is not too bad, and does provide some cool and interesting scares. I think it gets really dicey when it gets into what it's trying to say about sex work in general. I think that wasn't particularly well thought out in that regard. Again, I think some of the performances aren't too bad in this. There are some pretty creepy visuals. I just don't really think that the central premise of the film was super well thought through. And also, I think that in general, I was not a fan of this one. My last two coming up. Yesterday, I watched the Disney Plus special TV movie, basically called Werewolf by Night. This is based off a classic Marvel comic. I do not care about the MCU at all anymore. I don't follow these movies. I literally stopped watching them. I think from She-Hulk onwards, I just haven't pressed play because I can't be bothered. They are boring cookie cutter stuff that ruins most of Hollywood. That being said, I did enjoy this quite a bit. It's kind of got this framing element of like all of these hunters are set to hunt down a specific monster to inherit like a thing called the Bloodstone, which is this heirloom that the super badass hunter who recently died has, and it's got magical properties. Blah 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 blah. A werewolf is in there, but he's not the one that's being hunted. He's actually part of the hunters. Who could it be? This was very fun. It has some surprisingly gory visuals at the end of the movie and gets very bloody. It's all in black and white until the very last bit, so that's how they get away with it. But it's very funny because it's something that's kind of filmed in a way to bring to mind things like the original Wolfman, but the way that it goes out and the madness that gets in there, I was like, oh, that's not how the Wolfman was like. They did not get that violent. But anyways, I had a good time with it. I thought it was interesting. If you're somebody who falls to sleep whenever you hear someone talk about the MCU, I'm right there with you. But I do think Werewolf by Night is worth checking out. And last, but certainly not least, I watched Deadstream, which is basically a movie. It's like a found footage movie, and it's about a man who's going streaming. He's streaming in a ghost house. He has been quote unquote canceled, and he's trying to get back his follower base on YouTube. So he does this like amazing, like big, huge live stream event where he's gonna live stream his time in a haunted house. And this was very funny. I think it worked really, really well. Has some really good effects in it. Is definitely rides that balance between comedy and horror pretty well. I think it really takes the piss out of YouTubers, so probably a lot of us should probably watch that because I think it's very, very funny what it has to say about this platform in general, and it's just quite a good ride. I would love to know, what have you guys been watching, and have any recommendations, please put them in the comments below. Thank you, and have a great day. Goodbye.